There's a question that never quite lets go. It follows us in silence, in suffering, in awe. Whether whispered in prayer or shouted in rebellion, it's always the same. Does God exist? For many, this is the first question. But in the Buddhist path, it's not the most important one. And maybe it's not even the right one to begin with. That single question, does God exist, can become a doorway or a wall. It often marks the beginning of someone's spiritual journey, especially in the West. Whether you were raised to believe in a divine being or taught to question such ideas, this question lingers. It shapes how we see life, suffering, morality, even ourselves. For some, the answer brings comfort. For others, it stirs doubt. But either way, it holds power. In Buddhism, though, the journey doesn't begin there. The Buddha didn't argue for or against God. He didn't replace one belief system with another. Instead, he asked something far more personal. What are you experiencing right now? Is there peace in your heart? What is the nature of this suffering, and what might free you from it? This shift can feel unsettling. We're used to framing our lives around big questions with big answers. But the Buddha saw that many of these questions arise not from wisdom, but from fear. The fear of impermanence, the fear of being alone, the fear of meaninglessness. Sometimes we ask whether God exists not because we're seeking truth, but because we're trying to avoid a deeper question. Can I live in peace, even without knowing? And so, rather than solve the universe, the Buddha invited us to investigate the self, not the self as an identity, but the self as a stream of thoughts, emotions, habits, reactions. What is this mind that keeps chasing, fearing, clinging? What is it that suffers, and who is the one that notices? In this view, the God question becomes like a mirror, not to reveal a divine being, but to reflect the state of our own heart. Do we ask because we're curious, or because we're afraid? Do we seek comfort or awakening? Buddhism doesn't offer a final answer about God because it isn't concerned with winning debates. It's concerned with liberation. And liberation doesn't require us to define the divine. It requires us to see clearly, to feel deeply, and to let go, not of the question itself, but of the craving behind it. That is the path Buddhism points to, not toward belief or disbelief, but toward understanding. Not toward metaphysical certainty, but toward a kind of freedom that arises when we no longer need all the answers in order to be at peace. The Buddha's great silence, when not answering is the answer. We ended the last reflection with a shift, from asking about the universe to observing our own hearts. But what happens when we bring those big, burning questions directly to someone like the Buddha? What does he say to "Does God exist?" What answer could match the weight of that longing? The Buddha said nothing. That silence has unsettled seekers for over 2,500 years, not because it was dismissive, but because it was deliberate. The Buddha wasn't avoiding the question. He was inviting us to notice the questioner. Again and again, people came to him with their cosmic puzzles. Is the world eternal? Does the soul survive death? Is there a supreme being controlling it all? They weren't just curious, they were anxious. And underneath every question was a quiet plea. Tell me how to feel safe in a world I can't control. But instead of giving answers, the Buddha gave presence. Instead of offering doctrine, he offered a mirror. He saw that some questions don't lead us closer to truth. They lead us deeper into distraction. Not because they're unimportant, but because they come from a mind that hasn't yet learned how to look inward. The story of the poisoned arrow illustrates this perfectly. A man is struck and, instead of allowing treatment, insists on knowing everything about the shooter, their caste, their weapon, their motive. He wants certainty before healing, but he dies waiting. The Buddha compared philosophical speculation to that delay. The arrow is suffering, and it's already in us. The first task isn't to analyze it. It's to remove it. This is why Buddhism doesn't start with cosmology. It starts with discomfort, with the ache in the chest when life doesn't go as planned, with the restlessness behind even our moments of joy, with the clinging mind, the anxious heart. The God question, in this context, becomes secondary, not irrelevant, but not urgent, not wrong, but not the way out. And the silence? It wasn't the end of the conversation. It was a doorway into a different kind of listening, one that doesn't look for answers to quiet the mind, but that quiets the mind to let truth emerge on its own. This isn't passivity. It's radical presence, the kind of presence that sees suffering without rushing to name it, that feels fear without turning it into belief, that sits still in the mystery, not because it knows less, but because it knows what matters more. In a culture trained to debate, explain, and define, the Buddha's silence is both a challenge and an invitation. He invites us to notice what's happening in the heart of the one who asks. What are we really seeking when we seek God? And most importantly, can we stay long enough with that question, not to answer it, but to understand why we needed it in the first place? The poisoned arrow, urgency over speculation. We've already seen how the Buddha's silence wasn't emptiness, but direction, a turning away from speculation towards something more urgent. But what is so urgent that even the great metaphysical questions of the universe are set aside? The Buddha's answer came through a simple, piercing parable. He spoke of a man who had been struck by a poisoned arrow. As he lay suffering, his friends rushed to help him, but he refused treatment. Not until he knew everything about the arrow, who shot it, what caste they belonged to, what kind of bow was used, what poison was on the tip. He wanted full knowledge before he would allow healing. But of course, by the time he got his answers, he would already be dead. This is how the Buddha saw much of human inquiry. Not because the questions are inherently wrong, but because of their timing. When there's suffering already present, speculation can be a form of delay. When the mind spins with theory, the heart continues to bleed. The poisoned arrow isn't just a story, it's a diagnosis. The Buddha was showing us that we, too, are lying on the ground, wounded by craving, fear, restlessness. The arrow has already struck. And while we demand answers from the universe, why is there suffering? What is the meaning of life? Is there a God behind it all? Our time is running out. We don't need all the answers to begin healing. We just need to see the wound. That's what makes the Buddha's teaching so radically practical. He wasn't interested in feeding our need to know. He was interested in freeing us from the trap of needing to know. There's a subtle but profound difference. The first keeps us chasing. The second shows us how to stop. And what we find when we stop is that the wound is not just philosophical, it's existential. It lives in the small disappointments, the tight grip of wanting, the way joy fades too quickly, the way we fear even in moments of success. The Buddha called this dukkha, not just pain, but the deep unsatisfactoriness woven into ordinary life. And he taught that it can be understood not by thinking about it, but by looking directly into it. This is why Buddhism emphasizes practice over belief, why it invites investigation rather than instruction. It's not that questions are discouraged. It's that some questions only lead us further from ourselves. The point is not to reject those questions forever, but to see when they are a distraction and when they are a doorway. The man with the arrow didn't need a lecture. He needed presence. He needed clarity. He needed the arrow out. And so do we. Divine beings and the inner cosmos, seeing beyond the surface. When we hear the word divine, we tend to look up toward the heavens, the stars, the imagined realms beyond. In many spiritual traditions, the journey begins with creation. Who made the world? What higher beings watch over us? Where do we go when we die? These questions stir something primal, a deep longing for meaning, order, connection. But in Buddhism, the journey begins not with a creator, but with an experiencer, with you, and the moment you realize that despite all you have, there is still unease in your heart. That doesn't mean Buddhism ignores the divine. In fact, the early Buddhist texts are filled with mentions of heavenly realms, radiant beings, vast cosmologies. But here's the difference. In Buddhism, even the gods are impermanent. Even the divine is not beyond suffering. Even the highest heavens are still within the cycle of birth and death, gain and loss. And that changes everything. Because if the divine is not separate from the laws of impermanence and causality, then the true path isn't about worship. It's about understanding. It's not about appealing to something outside ourselves, but awakening to something within. In this view, the universe isn't just a vast collection of stars and spirits. It's a reflection of our own mind. The fears we project, the beauty we see, the stories we cling to, they are all shaped by the lens through which we look. And when that lens is clouded by craving, confusion, or pride, even the most beautiful vision can become distorted. The Buddha didn't ask us to deny the existence of divine beings. He asked us to look deeper, to ask not, do they exist, but what do they teach us about the nature of mind? What does our belief in gods reveal about our need for comfort, protection, or control? And more importantly, what happens when we realize that these qualities, radiance, clarity, compassion, are not exclusive to the divine, but available to us, right here, through practice? This is the real turning point. When we stop looking outward for salvation and start looking inward for awakening. When we understand that the luminous beings in Buddhist cosmology are not final destinations, but metaphors, archetypes, symbols of what the mind can become when freed from ignorance. So rather than argue about what's real or not real, Buddhism invites us to train the mind. Because when the mind is still, kind, and clear, the entire cosmos shifts. We begin to see that divine isn't something far away. It's the patience you offer a stranger, the breath you take before reacting, the moment you soften your grip on who you think you are. These are small things, but they are cosmic in their effect. To see beyond the surface is to realize that the realms we long for are not above us. They are within us, and they're waiting, not for our belief, but for our transformation. Belief in its shadow, when faith becomes a fetter. It's easy to think that belief is always a blessing, that to believe is to be grounded, guided, held. And sometimes it is. Faith can carry us through grief, give us strength in crisis, or offer hope when the world feels unkind. But what happens when belief, instead of opening the heart, begins to close it? The Buddha never condemned belief outright. He understood its power, but he also saw its danger, not the danger of believing, but of clinging. When belief becomes something we must defend, something that defines us or divides us, it turns from a light into a chain. In the Pali texts, this clinging is called upadana, the mental grasping that tightens the more we feel uncertain. And what's often hidden beneath that grip is fear. Fear of being wrong, of being lost, of being alone. We think the belief protects us, but sometimes it protects us from the very growth we need. It becomes a wall we decorate with symbols of truth, yet it's still a wall. This is not just about religious belief. We can cling to political views, personal stories, spiritual philosophies. We can cling to atheism just as tightly as someone else clings to God. In Buddhism, the question is never, is this belief right? But what is this belief doing to your mind? Is it making you more kind, more curious, more free? Or is it tightening the fist around your heart? This is where the beauty of skillful means, upaya, comes in. The Buddha taught that different people need different tools at different times. For one person, devotion may open the heart. For another, inquiry may clear the mind. There's no single right path. What matters is whether the path is helping you let go of suffering. Take Pure Land Buddhism, for example. On the surface, it looks like belief in a savior. People chant the name of Amitabha Buddha, visualize a celestial realm, trust in his vow to guide them. But when practiced deeply, this isn't blind belief, it's a mirror. Chanting becomes a way to cultivate sincerity, humility, trust. Faith, here, is not something to impose on others. It's something to soften the self. But the Buddha also warned, even faith can become a fetter if we hold it too tightly. If we turn our path into the only path, our insight into ideology, our tenderness into pride, we're still caught, still circling. Clinging to belief, any belief, can become just another form of identity. And when that happens, the belief no longer serves awakening. It serves ego. This is why Buddhism doesn't ask us to stop believing, but to hold our beliefs like tools, not trophies. To use them when they help, and let them go when they don't. Not because belief is bad, but because liberation is better. The most powerful truths are not the ones we shout, but the ones we live. The ones that make us more honest, more spacious, more able to meet the world without armor. Faith can be part of that, but only when it helps us open, not escape. Karma, responsibility, and the roots of suffering. It's one thing to question belief. It's another to take responsibility. After the comfort of devotion and the elegance of philosophy, responsibility can feel like a hard landing. But for the Buddha, it was essential. He didn't offer a world governed by divine justice or random fate. He pointed to something more intimate, more empowering, and more challenging. We are the authors of our lives. When asked why there is so much suffering in the world, the Buddha didn't speak of punishment or cosmic design. He spoke of causes, of conditions, of the way actions ripple outward, through speech, through choices, through moments of fear or love. Suffering, he said, isn't imposed from above. It arises from within, from the habits we feed, the intentions we carry, the energy we release into the world. This is karma, not reward, not punishment, but the unfolding of patterns. The law of cause and effect, not dictated by a judge, but by nature itself. We don't suffer because someone is punishing us. We suffer because the seeds we plant eventually grow. And even more than that, we suffer because we're often unaware that we're planting anything at all. But this isn't about blame. The Buddha never used karma to shame. He used it to awaken. He saw that when we recognize our role in the pattern, we're no longer victims of circumstance. We become participants in our own freedom. Responsibility, then, isn't a burden, it's a doorway. It says, if I help create this pain, then I can help end it. This idea unsettles the modern mind. We're taught to look outward, to systems, to enemies, to parents, to the past. But the Buddha keeps turning us inward, not to ignore injustice, but to stop fueling it with our own greed, hatred, and confusion. The three poisons, he called them, mental habits that shape not just individual suffering, but collective harm. If we want a different world, we can't just wait for it to be handed to us. We have to become the kind of mind that makes that world possible. Still, Buddhism never says that all pain is your fault. That would be cruel and incorrect. The teachings are more nuanced. We are shaped by countless conditions, upbringing, culture, trauma, environment. But in every moment, there is a sliver of space, a breath, a choice. And through that space, even the heaviest karma can begin to shift. This is why the Buddha taught practice, because insight alone is not enough. We must train the mind to see clearly, to pause, to respond instead of react. No deity can do this work for us. No belief system can substitute the effort. Liberation is not inherited. It is cultivated. And in this, there is dignity. We're not helpless. We're not cursed. We're not waiting for a savior. We are invited to see our patterns, to hold ourselves with compassion, and to begin again. The roots of suffering are not beneath us. They're within us. And that's exactly why we can reach them. Suchness, silence, and the end of needing an answer. We live in a world obsessed with answers. We want to know what's right, what's real, what's next. Certainty feels like safety. But at a certain point on the spiritual path, something strange happens. The questions begin to fall away, not because they've been answered, but because they no longer seem necessary. This is the territory of suchness. Tathata in the ancient texts, not a theory, not a belief, but a way of seeing. A perception so clear, so direct, that it doesn't need to be named. Suchness is the sound of the wind without labeling it wind. It's the ache in the heart without asking why. It's the presence of life, as it is, without the mind trying to shape it into something more manageable. This is where Buddhism departs most dramatically from systems of thought that aim to define reality. It doesn't replace one worldview with another. It lets go of the need for a worldview altogether. And in doing so, it invites a deeper kind of freedom, not the freedom to choose a side, but the freedom to stop needing sides at all. The Diamond Sutra offers a radical image. The teachings of the Buddha are like a raft, useful for crossing the river, but not meant to be carried on your back once you reach the shore. Even the truth, if clung to, becomes another burden. In this way, silence returns, not as avoidance, but as realization. It's the stillness that comes when you no longer need to argue with reality, not because you've solved it, but because you've made peace with it. This doesn't mean passivity. It doesn't mean indifference. It means the mind has stopped demanding that life be different in order to be at peace. It means we've begun to see that much of our suffering didn't come from the world, but from our insistence that the world explain itself. And when that insistence fades, what remains is something simple, not simplistic, but clear. The moment as it is, the self as it is, the breath as it is. This is the doorway into true insight, not built on knowing more, but on needing less. For the modern mind, trained to dissect, label, argue, and prove, this can feel like giving up. But it's not giving up, it's letting go. It's not the end of curiosity, but the birth of wonder. A kind of open-eyed humility that no longer demands an answer before it will. Trust the experience. Buddhism doesn't resolve the mystery of life. It teaches us how to live in it, to stop trying to conquer it with concepts, and instead to meet it with presence. To feel the wind, hear the silence, see the suchness, and let that be enough. Living the question, what truly matters on the path? We began this journey with a question, one that has followed humanity for centuries. Does God exist? But along the way, something shifted. The urgency of the question faded, not because it was answered, but because we began to see that the question itself might not be where the real search begins. What matters, the Buddha taught, is not whether we hold the right beliefs, but whether we see clearly, not whether we name the truth correctly, but whether we live in alignment with it. The path he offered wasn't a system of answers. It was a practice of presence, a way of walking that transforms not because it explains life, but because it teaches us how to live it with compassion, clarity, and courage. Imagine two people. One believes in God, but clings to anger, resentment, and fear. The other rejects all belief, but lives with kindness, humility, and peace. Which one is closer to freedom? Which one is truly awake? This is the heart of Buddhism's response to the God question. It's not about getting the metaphysics right. It's about getting the heart right. The teachings don't ask us to decide which side of the debate we're on. They ask us to notice how we show up in this moment. What are we holding on to? What are we avoiding? Where are we tightening? Where are we softening? The final teaching of the Buddha, as recorded in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, wasn't a theological conclusion. It was an invitation: be a lamp unto yourself. Don't look outside for what can only be discovered within. Not because the outside world has nothing to offer, but because the deepest truths are not handed down. They are lived, breath by breath. And so we return to the question, not to answer it, but to hold it differently. What happens when we stop asking, does God exist? And start asking, am I living in a way that brings peace? Am I reducing suffering? Am I meeting the world with a heart that is honest, open, and awake? In the end, the Buddha didn't reject belief. He reframed its purpose. Belief, when used wisely, can be a tool. But freedom, the kind of freedom that doesn't collapse when life changes, comes not from what we believe, but from how we live, from what we practice, from what we let go of, from what we choose to embody when no one's watching. So if the old question still echoes, God or no God, maybe the most honest response is not an answer at all, but a life. A life that leaves less harm and more love. A life that is present. A life that is free. And maybe, in this moment, the question isn't whether God exists, but whether we are ready to live with our eyes open, our hearts soft, and our steps mindful. That's where the real path begins. And begins again. If this reflection stirred something in you, if it offered clarity or calm, or even just a pause, know that this is just one step. The journey of awakening is not a single video. It's a way of living, a path walked breath by breath. We invite you to walk that path with us. If you feel resonance, subscribe to the channel, share this with someone on their own path, or leave a thought below. Every voice helps build a more conscious community. And if you're ready for the next step, explore our other videos. Each one opens another window into the heart of awakening.